You ever walk into a room and realize too late you were the only one who didn't belong there? The door to the secure briefing room hadn't even fully closed before the silence shifted, not the respectful kind, but the tight, uneasy kind that forms when something doesn't quite add up, and Staff Sergeant Kyle Mercer felt it for half a second before brushing it off as nothing, because nothing in his world ever slipped past him, not on his watch, not in a place like this. Not with Delta operators standing shoulder to shoulder under the cold hum of fluorescent lights and the low electronic direction. Sergeant First Class Daniel Brooks felt it before he understood it, his gaze narrowing slightly as he watched the old man's eyes track across the map, not randomly, not aimlessly, but with intention, precision, like he was reading it, processing it, understanding it faster than he should, faster than anyone who didn't belong here ever could. And that was the second thing that didn't make sense. Mercer took another step closer, impatience now sharpening his tone. This is a restricted Delta Force briefing. You don't have clearance to be in this room. The words landing harder, designed to push, to establish control, to end whatever this was. But still, no reaction. Just that same quiet presence, that same unsettling calm, like the man had all the time in the world and none of this urgency applied to him. One of the younger operators let out a quiet chuckle under his breath, breaking the tension just enough. Maybe he's here to give us directions. Another added, low laughter. Rippling briefly through the room, Mercer didn't smile, didn't look away, his focus locked, because now it wasn't about protocol anymore. It was about something else, something he couldn't quite define but refused to ignore. I'm going to ask you one more time, Mercer said, voice dropping slightly, controlled, deliberate. Who are you, and what unit are you with? The room stilled again, the faint hum of electronics filling the space between them, and for the first time, the old man shifted. Just slightly, his eyes leaving the map and settling on Mercer, steady, unreadable, and in that moment, without raising his voice, without changing his posture, he made the entire room feel smaller. Mercer held the man's gaze longer than necessary, just long enough to prove a point. But the point never landed, because there was nothing to push against, no hesitation, no confusion, just a steady calm that refused to acknowledge rank, tone, or authority, and that alone began to irritate him more than any outright defiance ever could. I asked you a question, Mercer said, sharper now. The room tightening around the edge in his voice, boots shifting subtly against the polished concrete floor. Gear straps creaking as a few operators adjusted their stance, watching, waiting, expecting the old man to finally crack under pressure the way civilians always did. But he did not crack, he did not flinch, he simply looked at Mercer as if measuring him, not judging, not challenging, just observing, and then, without a word, his eyes drifted back toward the map again, dismissing the tension like it did not deserve his attention. And that was when the atmosphere changed in a way Mercer could not ignore, because control had slipped, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, and quiet losses were the ones that stayed with you. That is not how this works, Mercer said, stepping closer, closing the distance to just a few feet, his shadow falling across the man's legs. You do not walk into a classified room, ignore direct questions, and expect to stay. The words were firm, controlled, but beneath them was something else now, something personal, because this was no longer about protocol. It was about being ignored, and Mercer was not used to being ignored, not here, not by anyone. A low murmur moved through the team, one operator leaning slightly toward another, whispering something that ended in a short, suppressed laugh, the sound echoing faintly off the walls, but it did not spread this time. It died quickly, because the room no longer felt like a place for humor, not with that stillness sitting in the center of it. Brooks felt it building, that same quiet pressure he had learned to recognize overseas, the kind that showed up right before something shifted in a way no one expected. His eyes moved from Mercer to the old man, then back again, calculating, uncertain, because nothing about this lined up with the normal patterns, and patterns were everything in their world. The old man's gaze traced the map once more, slower now, more deliberate, until it stopped at a single point near the edge of a marked valley. A detail small enough that most would overlook it. But not him. His hand lifted slightly from the armrest, just an inch, barely noticeable, and then settled again. But the movement had already been seen. Brooks caught it, his eyes narrowing as he followed. Where the man had been looking, and a faint crease formed between his brows, because that point on the map was wrong. Not completely, just slightly. A shift in positioning that changed the entire approach angle. Something their team had debated for the past 30 minutes without reaching a conclusion. And yet the old man had seen it in seconds without saying a word. Mercer noticed the glance, the shift in Brooks's attention, and it only fed the irritation building under his skin. You have something to say, you say it. Mercer pressed, his voice lower now, controlled, but carrying weight. Otherwise you are leaving this room. The old man finally looked at him again, and this time there was something different in his eyes, not challenge, not defiance, but recognition, as if he had heard that same tone before, in a different place, a different time, from a different man wearing a different uniform, and for the briefest moment, the distance between past and present felt thinner than it should have been. The room held its breath without realizing it, waiting, because something was about to be said, and whatever it was not going to land the way anyone expected. The silence stretched just long enough to become uncomfortable, the kind that made even the most disciplined men shift their weight without realizing it. And Mercer felt it slipping again, that control he prided himself on, inch by inch, say it. He repeated, slower this time, each word measured, deliberate, as if forcing the moment to bend back into place. But the old man did not rush, did not react to the pressure. He simply inhaled once, steady, almost quiet enough to miss, and then his gaze moved past Mercer again, back to the map, to that same point along the valley edge, and this time his hand rose fully, not abruptly, not dramatically, just a calm, deliberate motion, a single finger extending toward the wall. Your approach line is off by about 40 yards, he said, his voice low, rough with age but clear, each word carrying weight without needing volume. Wind shifts through that cut in the ridge, comes down fast and uneven. Your second team will lose visibility before they even realize it. The room froze, not because of the words themselves, but because of how easily they were delivered, how certain they sounded, as if the man was not offering a suggestion but stating something already proven. Mercer's jaw tightened, irritation flaring instantly. We have already accounted for environmental variables, he snapped, motioning toward the digital displays along the wall. We have real-time data feeding into that plan. But even as he said it, his eyes flicked to the map, to the exact point the man had indicated, and something in his expression shifted, just slightly, because that 40-yard margin was close, too close for a guess. Brooks felt it immediately, that tightening in his chest, because he had been the one to flag that same inconsistency earlier, quietly, without pushing it, trusting the system over instinct. And now here it was again, spoken out loud by someone who had no access to their data, no clearance, no reason to know any of it. How would you know that? Mercer asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it, his tone sharper than intended. And for the first time, a faint hint of something crossed the old man's face. Not a smile, not pride, just the smallest flicker of memory, something distant, something carried for a long time. Because I have seen it before, he replied simply, his hand lowering back to the armrest, the room absorbing the answer in silence. Mercer exhaled through his nose, frustration building again, because the response gave him nothing concrete, nothing he could challenge, nothing he could dismiss outright. And that was worse than being wrong. One of the operators shifted behind him, clearing his throat lightly. That is a pretty specific observation for someone who does not belong here. The tone carried a hint of skepticism, but it lacked the earlier humor. The edge had dulled into something closer to uncertainty. Brooks stepped forward slightly now, just enough to enter the space between Mercer and the old man, his voice quieter, more controlled. Sir, he said, choosing his words carefully. What unit were you with? The question landed differently this time, not as a challenge, but as a test. A line drawn in a different way. The old man's eyes moved to Brooks, holding there for a moment longer than before, as if deciding something, measuring the weight of the room, the men in it, the tension that had built around a single unanswered question. And then Mercer spoke again, cutting through the pause, unable to let it settle. Yeah, he said, a faint edge of mockery creeping back in, trying to reclaim ground. Go ahead. Give us something official. What was your call sign? A few of the men shifted again, waiting, the air tightening one last time, because now the moment had been set, pushed to its edge, and whatever came next was going to define everything that followed. The old man did not look away this time, his gaze steady, his voice calm, and when he spoke, it was softer than anyone expected, but it carried through the room like it had nowhere else to go. Titan 3. For a moment, nothing happened, and that was the part no one in the room was prepared for, because the words had been too simple, too quiet, delivered without force or emphasis, just a name, just a call sign, and yet it landed in a way that did not match its size. Like something heavier had been placed in the center of the room without anyone seeing it happen. Mercer blinked once, almost imperceptibly, the faintest crease forming at the edge of his eyes as he processed it, then dismissed it. Just as quickly, a short breath leaving his nose in something close to a scoff. That is it, he said, the hint of a smirk returning as he glanced over his shoulder at the others, searching for confirmation, for the shared understanding that this was nothing, that this was a joke that had gone on just long enough. A couple of the operators shifted, one letting out a low exhale that might have been the beginning of a laugh, but it never fully formed, because something in the room had changed. Subtle but undeniable, Brooks did not move, did not react outwardly, but his mind had already started moving faster, connecting something he could not yet see clearly, the name echoing once, then again, not in memory, but in instinct, the kind that had kept him alive more times than he could count. Titan 3. It did not sound made up, it did not sound casual, it sounded like something that had weight behind it, something that had been used before, somewhere it mattered. Mercer turned back to the old man, the smirk still there but thinner now, less certain. You expect anyone in this room to recognize that? He asked, his tone pushing again, trying to force the moment back into something controllable, something dismissible. But the old man did not respond this time. He simply held Mercer's gaze, steady, unblinking, as if the answer had already been given and required nothing more. And that was when the first real crack appeared, not in Mercer, but in the room itself, a small sound, almost insignificant, the faint clatter of something hitting the floor. One of the younger operators had dropped a pen, the plastic rolling a few inches across the concrete before coming to a stop, and no one laughed. No one moved to pick it up, because every set of eyes had shifted, not dramatically, not all at once, but enough to change the balance. Brooks stepped back half a pace, his hand already moving toward his pocket, slow, deliberate, his eyes never leaving the old man, because now the feeling in his chest was no longer uncertainty. It was recognition of something being wrong in a way that demanded attention. Mercer noticed the movement, his focus snapping to Brooks. "What are you doing?" he asked, the edge returning sharper this time. But Brooks did not answer immediately, his thumb already pressing against his phone screen, pulling up a secure line that very few in the room had access to. His voice low when he finally spoke, controlled but tight, just checking something. Mercer's jaw set, irritation flaring again. But beneath it, something colder had begun to settle, because the room was no longer reacting the way it should. The rhythm was off, the confidence fractured. And it all traced back to two words that should not have meant anything. Brooks turned slightly away, bringing the phone closer, his voice dropping even lower as the line connected. "This is Brooks," he said, giving his credentials quickly, his eyes flicking once toward the old man, then back to the floor. "I need a verification on a call sign." There was a pause, brief but heavy, the kind that always felt longer than it was, and then Brooks spoke again, quieter now. "Titan 3. The response on the other end did not come immediately, and that delay alone was enough to tighten every nerve in his body, because systems like this did not hesitate unless something required a higher level of access. Mercer watched him, the irritation now mixed with something he would not yet name, his arms crossing slightly, a defensive shift he did not realize he had made. The old man remained exactly where he was, unmoving, unbothered, as if the outcome had already been decided long before any of them walked into the room. And the silence returned again, heavier this time, no longer empty, but waiting. The delay on the line stretched just long enough to make every second feel deliberate, like something on the other end was being checked, then checked again, and Brooks felt it in the way his grip tightened slightly around the phone, his thumb pressing harder than necessary against the edge, his eyes fixed on nothing now, because whatever came next mattered more than anything else in that room. Stand by. The voice on the other end finally said, calm, controlled, but not routine, not dismissive. And that alone was enough to shift something deeper. Brooks did not respond. He did not need to. The line stayed open, and the silence that followed was heavier than before, not empty, but active, like a system thinking, processing, reaching beyond normal access. Mercer watched him closely now, the earlier irritation fading into something sharper, more focused, his instincts adjusting whether he wanted them to or not. Because this was no longer a simple interruption, this was something else, something that had moved beyond his control without his permission. It is just a name. One of the operators muttered under his breath, quieter than before, as if unsure whether saying it out loud was still acceptable. Mercer did not respond, because he was no longer certain that it was. The old man remained still, his hands resting exactly where they had been, his posture unchanged, but there was a weight to his presence now that had not been there before. Or maybe it had always been there, and they had simply failed to see it. Brooks heard a faint shift on the line, then another voice, older, sharper, cutting in without introduction. Who is requesting that call sign verification? The tone was precise, controlled, but it carried rank, the kind you did not question. Brooks straightened slightly without thinking, his voice tightening into form. Sergeant First Class Daniel Brooks. Sir, he replied, each word clear, measured. I am requesting confirmation on call sign Titan 3. There was a pause, shorter this time, but heavier, and then the voice came back, lower now. Repeat that call sign. Brooks swallowed once, barely noticeable. Titan 3, sir. The room felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls had shifted inward by an inch. Mercer's arms lowered slowly from where they had crossed, his stance adjusting. Subtle but real, because now he was listening in a different way, the kind of listening that came when something was no longer optional. The response did not come immediately, but when it did, it was different. Not a dismissal, not a correction, but a single word, spoken with a weight that landed harder than anything else so far. Confirmed. Brooks did not move, did not breathe for a fraction of a second, because confirmation was not supposed to sound like that. It was supposed to be routine, quick, procedural. This was none of those things. Status, Brooks asked, the word leaving his mouth before he could stop it, because now he needed to know, needed context, needed something to anchor what was happening. There was another pause, longer this time, and when the answer came, it was quieter, controlled, but unmistakable, restricted. The words settled into him like something cold, something that did not belong in normal channels. Mercer's eyes shifted, flicking from Brooks to the old man and back again, the tension in his jaw returning, but not from irritation now, from something else, something he was still trying to define. Brooks hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then pushed once more, requesting clearance level. The line went silent again, and this time the silence felt final, like a line had been crossed, like something had been asked that should not have been. When the voice returned, it was firmer, sharper, leaving no room for interpretation. Negative. A brief pause, then one final statement, each word deliberate. Stand by and do not engage. The line cut immediately after. No closing, no acknowledgement, just silence. Brooks lowered the phone slowly, his hand steady but his mind racing, because orders like that did not happen without reason, and whatever that reason was, it was standing 10 feet in front of them, unmoving, waiting. Mercer watched him, the room watching both of them now, and for the first time since the old man had entered, Mercer did not speak, because something had shifted beyond words, and he knew it. No one spoke after Brooks lowered the phone, and that silence was different now, no longer uncertain, no longer awkward, but controlled, deliberate, like every man in the room had instinctively stepped back from an invisible line they did not understand but knew not to cross. Mercer felt it settle into his chest, that shift from command to caution, subtle but undeniable, and it irritated him in a way he could not immediately justify, because nothing had been said out loud, no rank had been declared, no orders had been given directly to him, and yet something had overridden the room, something that did not belong to him. His jaw tightened slightly as he studied the old man again. searching for something concrete, something visible that explained what had just happened. But there was nothing, no insignia, no recognizable patch, no sign of authority that matched the reaction they had just received, just an old jacket, worn edges, a quiet posture, and eyes that did not shift under pressure. Brooks took a slow breath, steadying himself, his voice low when he finally spoke. "Sir," he said, not as a demand this time, not even as a question, but as a form of acknowledgement, a subtle shift in tone that did not go unnoticed by anyone in the room. Mercer's head turned slightly toward him, catching that change immediately, and for a brief moment, something close to conflict flickered across his expression, not outward, not obvious, but there, because Brooks was not the kind of man who adjusted tone without reason, and that meant the situation had already moved beyond normal parameters. The old man looked at Brooks again, the same steady gaze, but there was something else now, something quieter, almost like recognition, not of the man, but of the moment itself, as if he had seen this pattern before, this exact progression, the disbelief, the tension, the realization creeping in too late. "You should adjust your entry angle," the old man said calmly, his voice unchanged, as if the entire exchange that had just taken place had not shifted anything for him at all. 40 yards becomes 80 once the wind cuts across the ridge. Your second unit will not see it coming. Mercer exhaled slowly, the sound controlled but heavier than before, because now the words landed differently. Not as interference, not as arrogance, but as something that had already proven itself once, and that made them harder to ignore. He glanced at the map again, longer this time, his mind recalculating whether he wanted it to or not. One of the operators behind him shifted, his voice quieter now, lacking the earlier confidence. "That matches the thermal drift we flagged earlier." Mercer did not respond, but he heard it, and so did everyone else. Brooks stepped slightly closer to the old man now, not enough to invade space, but enough to close the distance, his posture more attentive, more deliberate. "You have seen this terrain before," he said, not asking, just stating. The old man gave the smallest nod, barely noticeable. "A long time ago," he replied, and that answer carried more weight than any detailed explanation could have. Mercer straightened slowly, his shoulders settling into a different kind of readiness, not the forward pressure he was used to, but something more measured, more cautious, because now the situation had changed in a way he could not ignore, even if he did not fully understand it yet. The room held that silence again, but this time it was not waiting for an answer, it was waiting for something else, something bigger, something outside the room, because every instinct in that space now pointed to the same conclusion. Whatever Titan 3 meant, it had not finished unfolding, and when it did, it was not going to be subtle. The room did not return to normal. It could not, because something fundamental had shifted beneath their feet, and every man there could feel it whether they admitted it or not. Mercer stood still for a moment longer than he should have, eyes fixed on the map, but not seeing it anymore. His mind replaying the last 60 seconds in fragments that refused to settle into something logical, a restricted confirmation, a direct order not to engage, a call sign that triggered a response higher than his clearance. None of it aligned with the man in front of him, and that mismatch was what unsettled him most. Not fear, not yet, but the realization that he was no longer the highest authority in the room. Even if no one had said it out loud, Brooks felt it too. But where Mercer resisted it, Brooks adjusted, his posture shifting subtly, shoulders relaxing just enough to signal awareness rather than control, his eyes never leaving the old man. Because now the question was no longer who he was, but why he was here, and that answer had not been given yet. A faint sound broke the silence, soft at first, almost easy to miss, the distant hum of a rotor blade cutting through the air somewhere beyond the reinforced walls, low, steady, approaching, the kind of sound that did not belong to routine-based traffic. Heads turned instinctively, not fully, not dramatically, just enough to acknowledge it. Mercer's eyes flicked toward the door, then back again, his jaw tightening once more, because he knew that sound. Everyone in that room did. And it was not something that arrived without purpose. The old man did not react, not to the sound, not to the shift in the room. He remained exactly where he was, hands resting, posture unchanged, as if whatever was coming had nothing to do with him or everything to do with him. And that distinction no longer mattered, Brooks took a slow step back, creating space without drawing attention to it. His instincts now fully engaged, not in defense, not in challenge, but in recognition of a chain of events that had already been set in motion before any of them realized it. Mercer exhaled slowly, the tension in his chest settling into something colder, more controlled. "No one leaves this room," he said quietly, not as an order of authority, but as a statement of necessity, his voice steady, but lower than before, and no one argued, no one questioned it, because they all understood the same thing now. Whatever was happening next was not optional. The hum outside grew louder, closer, the faint vibration reaching through the structure of the building, a subtle tremor beneath their boots, and then another sound layered over it, sharper, more immediate, the distant echo of footsteps moving quickly down the hallway beyond the secured door, measured, urgent, not chaotic, but purposeful. Mercer's eyes locked on the entrance now, fully, his stance shifting again, not aggressive, not defensive, but ready in a different way, the kind of readiness that came when you knew something bigger than you was about to walk in. Brooks glanced once at the old man, searching for any reaction, any indication of expectation, but there was none, just that same steady calm, the same quiet presence that had not changed from the moment he entered, and that was the final piece that settled it in Brooks's mind. Whatever rank, whatever history, whatever classification sat behind the name Titan 3, it was not reacting to the moment because it already knew how it would end. The footsteps outside stopped just short of the door, the hum of the rotor holding steady in the distance, and for one brief second, the entire room stood suspended in a silence, so complete it felt like the air itself had paused, waiting, because whatever came through that door next was not going to ask permission. The door did not burst open. It did not swing wide with force. It opened with controlled precision, a smooth motion that carried more authority than any dramatic entrance ever could. And the moment it did, every man in the room felt it before they even saw who stood on the other side. Because presence like that did not need introduction, General Robert Whitaker stepped into the briefing room without hesitation, his uniform immaculate, his posture exact, his eyes already locked onto a single point before the door had even fully closed behind him. And that point was not Mercer, not Brooks, not the map. It was the old man in the wheelchair. Mercer straightened instinctively, his spine aligning before his mind caught up, the reaction automatic, trained over years. But this time it came with something else layered beneath it, something unfamiliar, because the general did not acknowledge him, did not even glance in his direction. Brooks felt it too, that shift in priority so absolute it left no room for interpretation. The general's pace did not slow as he crossed the room, each step measured, deliberate, the faint sound of his boots against the floor echoing louder than it should have in the silence. No one spoke, no one moved, because no one knew what to say, what to do. The script had been broken long before this moment, and now they were all standing inside something they did not fully understand. Mercer's jaw tightened again, not from defiance, but from the realization that whatever was happening was now far above him, far beyond anything he could control or redirect. The general stopped exactly 3 feet in front of the old man, close enough to speak, close enough to confirm, but not close enough to invade. And for a fraction of a second, the room held its breath, waiting for words, waiting for explanation, waiting for anything that would anchor what they were seeing into something familiar. But the general did not speak, not immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the man in front of him, searching, confirming, and then something shifted, not in the room, but in the posture of the highest-ranking officer present. General Whitaker drew a slow breath, squared his shoulders, and then, without hesitation, without announcement, he raised his hand in a crisp, formal salute, the motion sharp, precise, and absolute. The sound of his palm cutting through the air was small, but it echoed in a way that felt impossibly loud. And in that instant, the entire room froze, not out of confusion anymore, but out of understanding. Mercer felt it hit him like a physical weight, the realization snapping into place with a clarity that left no room for denial. Because there was only one reason a general would salute first, and it was not protocol, it was respect, earned, undeniable, beyond rank. Brooks reacted a fraction of a second later, his own hand rising almost on instinct, followed by the others, one by one. The room aligning not because they were ordered to, but because they had no choice, because the truth had just been made visible in the simplest way possible. And through it all, the old man remained seated, his posture unchanged, his expression steady, his eyes meeting the general's without surprise, without pride, just quiet acknowledgement, as if this moment had already happened once before, long ago, in a different place, under different skies, and this was merely the echo of something that had never really ended. The salute held for a second longer than necessary, not out of hesitation, but out of meaning, the kind that did not need to be explained because everyone in that room could feel it settling into place. General Whitaker lowered his hand slowly, his eyes never leaving the old man's face. And when he finally spoke, his voice was calm, controlled, but carried a weight that reached every corner of the room without effort. "It has been a long time, sir." The word landed heavier than anything that had come before it, not because of rank, but because of what it acknowledged. Mercer felt his chest tighten as the reality fully set in, the pieces aligning in a way that left no room for doubt. This was not a misunderstanding, not a mistake. This was something they had failed to recognize until it was too late. The old man gave a small nod, barely perceptible, his voice quiet when he answered, "Long enough." There was no pride in it, no need for it, just a simple truth carried across years. No one else in the room could see. Brooks remained at attention, but his focus had shifted completely, not on the general, not on the room, but on the man they had all misjudged, the man who had walked in without announcement and changed everything without raising his voice. General Whitaker turned slightly then, his gaze moving across the Delta operators, and for the first time since entering, he acknowledged them, not with anger, not with reprimand, but with something far more precise. "You were given an opportunity to listen," he said evenly, "and you chose not to." The words were not loud, but they carried enough force to land exactly where they needed to. Mercer held his position, his face set, but the weight of it was undeniable, not humiliation, not quite, but something close, something sharper, because this was not a failure of skill, it was a failure of judgment, and that cut deeper. The general's eyes returned to the old man, his tone shifting again, softer now, respectful in a way that needed no formality. "We still use your approach model," he said, glancing briefly at the map, "though it seems we forgot why it works." A faint pause followed, the kind that carried meaning without explanation. The old man looked toward the map once more, his eyes tracing the lines that had been discussed before he arrived, then back to the general. "You did not forget," he said quietly. "You just stopped paying attention." The simplicity of it settled into the room in a way no briefing ever could. Mercer lowered his gaze for the first time, just slightly, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement, because there was nothing to argue, nothing to push against. The truth had already been made clear. The general nodded once, then stepped back half a pace, not to create distance, but to restore balance. "We have a briefing to complete," he said, his tone returning to command. But it no longer carried the same structure as before, because the room had changed. The hierarchy had shifted in a way no rank chart could reflect. Brooks moved to the side, creating space near the map without needing to be told. Mercer followed a second later, his movements precise, controlled, but different now, more measured, more aware. The old man remained seated, exactly where he had been from the start, but now the entire room oriented around him. Not because they were told to, but because they understood, and in the quiet that followed, no one laughed, no one questioned, no one underestimated again, because some names were not meant to be explained, only remembered.